church is looking a little bit unloved and wondering if we could do something about it.
Sometimes there's a great temptation to just walk away from the building, but it seems to us that that would be a crime.
It's important to me because it's my church. I want to see it brought back to life.
Ever since English Heritage was set up in 1983, places of worship have been one of our top priorities. That's partly because there are 14,500 listed places of worship. That includes 50% of all Grade 1 listed buildings. But it's also because these buildings are so often at the heart of communities and at the heart of people's lives. They mark the times that are important: births, deaths, marriages, celebrations. This year, English Heritage decided that we ought to spend more time asking you, the people who look after these buildings, what it is that you need from us as a national organisation who is able to provide grants, advice and other types of support. And I'd like to thank everybody who's responded over the last few months. Not surprisingly, many people have said that the core problem is the balance that has to be achieved between mission and looking after the fabric. Very few people go to their place of worship to be a project manager or an architect or a maintenance expert. So at this point, I had better come clean and admit that I'm actually on a parochial church council. And one day, when I wasn't at a meeting, I was voted the fabric officer. So I've got a pretty good idea of what it's like to look after a Grade 2-star listed building. The bureaucracy, the faculty system, the fundraising, the expense, and, for goodness sake, English Heritage. And I also know what it's like to apply for a grant from the joint scheme. Now, the joint scheme is the scheme that's run by English Heritage and the Heritage Lottery Fund, and it gives £25 million a year away to places of worship. The fund concentrates on what we call high-level works. That is essentially keeping the water out. These are big, expensive works that very few other people are interested in funding and, generally speaking, only need to be undertaken once in a generation. Sadly, we can only fund about half of the people who apply to us. And that's one of the reasons why we're so keen to produce this DVD, because we believe there are other things that we can help with, other than just money, that will help you in looking after these vital parts of England's precious heritage.
Places of worship are abiding parts of community life. So one doesn't just want to preserve the building. It's the history, it's the social history of the lives encompassed by those communities.
I think that when people saw lights flickering in there, they realized there was some life in the old dog yet. And it was nice to see people feeling that, yes, maybe our church can be part of the village again.
And it gives you that type of, that homely feeling, that warmth, that, you know, this is now how it's a communities. You know, this is a place where we can be proud of. And you feel, you know, yes, let's go to worship. And that's what it's all about.
Over the last couple of years, English Heritage has been running a campaign called Heritage at Risk. This sets out to compile a list of all the nationally important heritage that is currently vulnerable in some way. This year, the focus of Heritage at Risk is on places of worship, and we've just completed a national sample survey that seems to show that 90% of all places of worship in England are in very good condition. This is an extraordinary testament to the energy, enthusiasm and hard work of thousands of volunteers up and down the country. But of course, the survey also shows that there are 10% of listed places of worship that do have problems. Perhaps those problems are not as severe as those that this church in Lincolnshire faced, which was in fact closed for 10 years before the incumbent and the congregation got on top of the quite severe structural problems that it was facing. So our campaign, the DVD, booklet and website sets out to provide support not only for that 10%, but for all congregations who are perhaps facing difficulties in handing on to future generations the important common heritage that they support on all our behalves.